I didn't hear the brakes. I heard an engine surge, angry and deliberate, like someone made a decision and pushed through it. The white SUV came off the street fast, cut hard into my driveway, and lined itself up with my son's lemonade stand like it had a target. For a half second, my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing, because no adult is supposed to aim 2 tons of steel at a child over a word as small as no. Kelvin was counting quarters with his back turned, shoulders hunched in concentration, 8 years old, and proud of himself in a way you never forget as a parent. I shouted his name, but the sound came out strangled, like my chest knew it was already too late. The hood filled my vision, sunlight flashing off chrome, the grill swallowing the little folding table in front of him. I lunged, shoved him sideways with everything I had, felt his small body stumble out of the path as wood exploded and glass shattered. The lemonade stand disintegrated in a white spray of splinters, sugar water, and ice. A summer afternoon turning violent in a single breath. I slammed both hands down on the hood as it kept rolling, not attacking it, not thinking, just stopping it, because stopping it was the only thing left to do. Before we move forward, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? The SUV jerked to a halt so close I could feel the heat of the engine through my palms. For a moment there was nothing but the ticking metal and my own breathing tearing in and out of my chest. Kelvin was crying behind me, sharp little sobs that cut straight through everything else. I looked through the windshield and saw HOA Karen's face. Not shocked, not horrified, but tight with anger, like her plan had been inconvenienced instead of exposed. She didn't jump out to check on my son. She didn't ask if anyone was hurt. She threw the door open and pointed at the wreckage like it was evidence in her favor. "This is an unapproved structure," she snapped, voice already climbing into that shrill register she used when she wanted witnesses to hear her authority. "It's a safety hazard, and I warned you about violations." My kid was on the ground crying, his knees scraped, his stand in pieces, and she was quoting bylaws like scripture. Neighbors started spilling out of their houses, drawn by the noise, phones already in their hands. Some of them looked confused, some horrified, and some frozen, like they were waiting to see which version of reality HOA Karen was about to declare official. I turned just enough to see Kelvin sitting on the grass, clutching his arm, eyes wide and searching for me like he needed confirmation that the world hadn't completely snapped. I told him to squeeze my hand, and he did, fingers shaking, grounding me more than anything else could. Behind us, HOA Karen was still talking, louder now, explaining, narrating, building a story that put her in control and everyone else in the wrong. She said she had been approaching slowly. She said I charged her vehicle. She said the stand should never have been there. Each sentence landed like a slap, because none of it mattered in the face of what just happened. And yet I knew it was about to matter anyway. Sirens cut through her voice, distant at first, then closing fast. 2 police cruisers pulled up, lights washing the street in red and blue, turning my driveway into a crime scene whether I wanted it to be or not. HOA Karen shifted instantly, like someone flipped a switch inside her. Her shoulders sagged, her voice wavered, and she clutched her chest like she was the one in danger. "Thank God you're here," she said, rushing toward the officers before they even reached us. "He attacked me. He ran at my car and started hitting it. I was terrified." I stood there stunned, my hands still aching from the hood, lemonade dripping off my shoes, my son crying behind me, and she was pointing at me like I was the threat. One of the officers looked at me cautiously and asked me to step aside. The other went to talk to her, nodding along as she spoke, already absorbing her version of events. They put me in the back of a cruiser to take my statement. I sat there behind the cage, door shut, watching my wife hold our son on the porch, watching neighbors cluster and whisper, watching HOA Karen stand in her driveway with her arms folded like she'd just finished a meeting instead of nearly killing a child. I told the officer exactly what happened, every second of it, my voice shaking only when I described shoving Kelvin out of the way. He listened, wrote it down, asked questions, then left me there while they talked to witnesses. Minutes dragged by, slow and heavy, the kind that make you feel smaller every time you breathe. When the door finally opened and they told me I wasn't being charged, relief hit so hard my knees almost gave out. They said witnesses had video. They said tire tracks didn't lie. They said handprints on the hood told a different story than the one HOA Karen was selling. But then they said something else. Something colder. Without proof of intent, it would be hard to charge her with assault. She claimed it was an accident. Her foot slipped. She panicked. The report would reflect a traffic incident pending further review. I watched HOA Karen across the street as they spoke, saw the small, satisfied curl of her mouth when she realized she wasn't being arrested. That look wasn't relief. It was confirmation. In her mind, she had just tested the limits and found them flexible. The first HOA notice arrived less than 48 hours later. Cream-colored envelope, gold logo, thick paper that felt expensive in your hands. Public nuisance fine. Unauthorized commercial activity fine. Improper driveway usage fine. A handwritten note at the bottom thanked us for our prompt cooperation. I crushed it in my fist and threw it across the kitchen, the sound sharp and useless. Tina didn't yell. She picked it up, smoothed it out, and scanned it like she was cataloging evidence, because she already understood something I was still catching up to. This wasn't over. This wasn't even close to over. The SUV wasn't the end. It was the beginning. HOA Karen hadn't lost control that day. She'd revealed how far she was willing to go to keep it, and standing in my driveway, looking at a pile of splintered wood where my son's pride used to be, I understood something with terrifying clarity. Anyone who can look at a crying child and still reach for authority isn't done when they get caught. They're just adjusting. Before HOA Karen ever put her hands on a clipboard or her foot on an accelerator, Granderson Estates had already taught people how to stay quiet. It wasn't written anywhere official, but everyone understood it. You didn't stand out, you didn't push back, you didn't become a problem. The houses were too clean, the lawns too symmetrical, the smiles too rehearsed for anyone to forget that order mattered more than people. I learned that early, not because I agreed with it, but because you feel it in the way neighbors lower their voices when rules come up, in the way complaints are phrased as jokes, in the way everyone knows who runs things without needing to ask. HOA Karen ran things because she wanted to, not because she was good at it, not because she was fair, but because she was relentless. She knew the bylaws the way some people know scripture, not to guide, but to strike. She understood which rules could be bent, which ones could be weaponized, and which ones scared people enough to keep them compliant. Authority in Granderson Estates wasn't about leadership. It was about pressure applied just often enough to remind everyone who could make their lives uncomfortable. My family didn't fit her preferred mold, and I didn't realize how much that mattered until later. I work with my hands. I don't perform politeness when something feels wrong. Tina balances me out. She's precise where I'm blunt, strategic where I'm reactive, calm where I'm ready to charge headfirst. Kelvin sits right between us, absorbing everything, watching how adults handle power whether we want him to or not. We didn't move into Granderson Estates to make a statement. We moved there because it was close to work, close to schools, and looked safe. That illusion of safety is exactly what HOA Karen guarded so aggressively. Kelvin's lemonade stand wasn't rebellion, it wasn't protest. It was a kid wanting to do something on his own and feel proud of it. That's what made it dangerous to someone like her. Power structures don't get threatened by crime, they get threatened by refusal, by someone small saying no and not backing down. Brad's behavior that day wasn't just teenage entitlement, it was training. He had been taught that rules existed to serve him, that authority bent around his wants, that my mom runs this place wasn't a boast, it was leverage. When Kelvin didn't fold, it cracked something that had nothing to do with lemonade. I'd seen Karen work before, just not up close. I'd watched her fine a neighbor over a basketball hoop that could be seen from the street. I'd watched her make an elderly couple repaint their mailbox twice because the shade was inconsistent. I'd watched her waive violations for people she liked and double them for people who asked questions. None of it seemed connected at first. It just felt like the cost of living somewhere nice. What I didn't understand yet was that she kept mental lists. Who complied? Who resisted? Who needed to be reminded? When the email about the lemonade stand went out, copied to the entire neighborhood, it wasn't about compliance. It was about public pressure, about showing everyone what happened when someone stepped out of line. The ridiculous application requirements weren't meant to be followed. They were meant to humiliate. They were meant to say, I decide what's allowed here, and I decide how hard I make it for you. Tina saw that immediately. That's why she stopped me from replying. HOA Karen thrived on visible defiance. She needed it to justify escalation. Brad, walking away embarrassed that first day, didn't end the conflict. It started it. It told Karen that her authority hadn't been enough, that a child in her neighborhood had refused her son and survived. People like her don't forget that. They don't let it go. They correct it. And correction in her world didn't mean conversation or compromise. It meant force disguised as procedure. The reason the SUV mattered wasn't just because it was violent. It was because it was intentional escalation cloaked in entitlement. Karen didn't scream threats beforehand. She didn't issue one final warning. She acted as if she had the right to erase the problem herself. That kind of confidence doesn't come from impulse. It comes from experience getting away with smaller abuses for so long they start to feel invisible. After the police left that day, after the neighbors went back inside and Kelvin fell asleep exhausted, I sat in the kitchen staring at the driveway. I kept replaying her face in my head. Not the moment of impact, but the moment after. The lack of concern, the immediate pivot to rules. That told me everything I needed to know about how she saw power. Rules weren't limits to her. They were tools. And she believed she was the one entitled to use them. The first fine confirmed it. The second proved it. The handwritten note sealed it. HOA. Karen wasn't reacting emotionally, and she was building a record, a narrative, a justification. She believed that if she buried us in enough paperwork, if she made us look like repeat offenders, the system would eventually side with her by default. That's how authority works when people stop questioning it. It doesn't need truth, it just needs volume. Tina understood the danger before I did. She saw how patterns formed, how escalation followed resistance, how silence was enforced not by one dramatic act, but by 1,000 small pressures. She also understood something else, something HOA Karen didn't account for. Systems leave traces. Authority creates records. And people who abuse power always get sloppy eventually because they believe fear will cover their tracks. By the time the second envelope hit the counter, the conflict had already moved past neighborhood drama. It had crossed into something structural. This wasn't about a lemonade stand anymore. It was about who got to decide what mattered, whose voice counted, and how far someone could go before anyone stopped them. HOA Karen thought she was teaching us a lesson. What she was really doing was giving us a map of how she operated. And once you see the map, you can stop wandering. Once HOA Karen decided we were a problem, the pressure didn't come loud at first. It came organized. It came scheduled. It came wrapped in polite language and official headers that made every threat look reasonable on paper. The fines multiplied, not randomly, but rhythmically, spaced just enough apart to keep us constantly reacting. Each notice referenced a different subsection, a different clause, a different justification, all pointing toward the same outcome: exhaustion, compliance, silence. She understood something most people underestimate. Authority doesn't need to be right if it can be constant. It only needs to create enough friction that resisting feels more painful than giving in. The letters weren't meant to bankrupt us immediately. They were meant to grind us down, to make us second-guess every decision, every choice, every step we took on our own property. The message was simple and relentless. You live here because I allow it. The surveillance cameras became part of that pressure. HOA Karen loved to remind people they existed, loved to talk about community safety while using them as quiet intimidation. Everyone knew which streets they covered. Everyone knew who controlled access. When something happened near your house, you didn't ask for footage. You hoped she didn't already have it. That imbalance mattered. It kept people from pushing back because evidence lived in her hands. That's why deleting the footage mattered more than she realized. It wasn't just a cover-up. It was an admission that she understood the line she'd crossed. Innocent people don't erase records. People who believe they're untouchable do it sloppily, assuming no one will ever check. Tina checking the server logs wasn't a dramatic moment. It was quiet, clinical, and devastating. The timestamp told the truth she couldn't rewrite. She didn't wait. She didn't hesitate. She erased it as soon as she thought the threat had passed. The tow truck escalation followed the same pattern. No confrontation, no discussion, just a work order issued under her authority, citing violations that didn't exist, applied in ways the bylaws didn't allow. It wasn't about removing a vehicle. It was about demonstrating reach, about showing she could summon force onto our driveway without warning. The fact that Kelvin was inside the truck wasn't an accident. It was leverage. Fear sharpens obedience faster than fines ever could. When that failed, she escalated again. This time she reached beyond the HOA entirely. Child Protective Services wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a calculated move designed to terrify. Once you involved the state, you change the stakes completely. You tell a family that their entire life is now subject to outside judgment. HOA. Karen knew exactly how heavy that threat was. She also knew how difficult it is to fully undo once it's made. What she didn't anticipate was documentation. She believed power flowed in one direction, from her desk outward. She believed that people who felt threatened would retreat, not record. That assumption had worked for her for years. It worked because most people didn't want conflict. They wanted peace. They wanted quiet. And they believed the cost of pushing back would be higher than the cost of surrendering something small. The abuse wasn't isolated to us. That became clear quickly. Once the CPS worker left and closed the case as malicious, the pattern snapped into focus. Every escalation followed the same arc. Identify resistance, apply administrative pressure, increase penalties, introduce fear, remove stability, force compliance or exit. The system wasn't broken. It was functioning exactly as she designed it. HOA. Karen didn't act alone, and that was the most dangerous part. She didn't need co-conspirators who were cruel. She only needed people who were afraid, board members who signed what she put in front of them, vendors who asked no questions, neighbors who stayed quiet because they'd seen what happened to anyone who didn't. Power structures like that don't survive because everyone agrees. They survive because enough people decide it's safer not to resist. Every time another notice arrived, Tina added it to the file. Every minor harassment, every misplaced trash complaint, every sudden inspection, all of it went into the record. The more HOA Karen pushed, the clearer her methods became. She was predictable. She escalated when challenged. She doubled down when exposed. She relied on authority to substitute for justification. And she assumed the system would protect her because it always had. That assumption was her greatest weakness. By the time the CPS report was officially flagged as false and malicious, the narrative she'd built started cracking. Systems don't like being used as weapons once evidence surfaces. Agencies talk to each other. Records cross-reference. The same confidence that let her swing an SUV at a lemonade stand made her careless with documentation. She didn't hide everything. She didn't think she had to. What HOA Karen failed to understand was that authority only works when people believe it's legitimate. The moment evidence showed her abusing it, every action she'd taken retroactively became suspect. The power structure she built to protect herself started exposing her instead. And once that shift happens, escalation stops working. It stops intimidating, it starts incriminating. The pressure she applied was meant to isolate us. Instead, it connected the dots. It showed exactly how far she was willing to go, exactly how she justified it to herself, and exactly why she couldn't be allowed to keep control. She thought she was tightening her grip. In reality, she was building the case against herself one threat at a time. The moment we stopped reacting and started tracing, everything changed. Fear thrives in confusion, but it starves under clarity. Every notice HOA Karen sent, every threat wrapped in letterhead, every procedural action she took left behind a residue she didn't bother cleaning. She assumed intimidation erased scrutiny. It never does. It only delays it. And delays give time for patterns to surface. Tina approached it like a system audit, not a revenge mission. That distinction mattered. She didn't start with emotion. She started with access points, server logs, vendor invoices, board approvals, HOA bylaws that no one ever read because everyone assumed Karen already had. The deeper she went, the clearer it became that the authority Karen wielded wasn't absolute. It was conditional. It required compliance from systems that still kept records, timestamps, and signatures. The deleted footage was the first crack, but it wasn't the only one. The HOA portal showed something subtle but damning. Activity spikes tied directly to our address. Manual overrides. Administrative actions executed outside standard review windows. Karen wasn't following process. She was bypassing it. That might intimidate neighbors, but to anyone who understands systems, it reads like a confession written in metadata. Then came the money. Fines don't just appear. They're logged, allocated, transferred. Tina cross-referenced payment demands with actual ledger entries. Some fines were never recorded properly. Others were recorded, then quietly reclassified. Administrative fees, enforcement costs, miscellaneous expenses. The same categories appeared again and again, and they always flowed in one direction, toward accounts connected to services Karen personally used. Landscaping, vehicle services, emergency enforcement, all justified, none legitimate. That's when we realized she wasn't just abusing power, she was monetizing it. The tow truck order became pivotal. The company name looked real at a glance, but the deeper we looked, the thinner it got. The business license existed, but it didn't authorize residential driveway seizures. The order referenced covenants that didn't apply to private property. The signature authority was hers alone. No board vote, no emergency declaration, just her name, her title, and a hope no one would challenge it. Every piece of evidence reinforced the same truth. HOA Karen operated on the assumption that no one would slow down enough to verify. She relied on momentum, on the belief that once authority speaks, compliance follows. What she didn't account for was a family willing to pause everything else to document every move she made. Neighbors started coming forward quietly, not publicly, not loudly, in messages, in brief conversations, in nods that lingered too long. They'd been fined for absurd things, targeted after minor disagreements, threatened with liens that never materialized but kept them awake at night. The pattern repeated across years. Different addresses, same playbook, same outcome, silence. The CPS report sealed it. The agency's internal notes flagged it as malicious. That designation carries weight. It follows the reporter. It creates a record, one that can't be erased by deleting a file. Karen's attempt to weaponize the state backfired because the state does not appreciate being used as a personal cudgel. Once that line was crossed, her actions stopped looking like HOA enforcement and started looking like criminal escalation. Tina compiled everything into a single timeline, not a narrative, a sequence: action, response, escalation, abuse, cover-up, retaliation. Each step supported by logs, footage, invoices, emails, and witness statements. It didn't rely on interpretation. It relied on facts arranged in an order that spoke for itself. The picture it painted was impossible to ignore. What made it lethal wasn't volume. It was coherence. Every document reinforced the others. Every contradiction traced back to Karen's decisions. She couldn't blame clerical error, because the same errors benefited her repeatedly. She couldn't claim misunderstanding because the same rules were enforced selectively. She couldn't plead ignorance because the logs showed deliberate action. The realization hit hard. This wasn't just about our son, or a lemonade stand, or a moment of rage behind the wheel of an SUV. This was about a person who believed authority insulated her from consequence, who believed systems existed to serve her, not restrain her. And once that belief was exposed, everything she'd built started collapsing under its own weight. The proof didn't need dramatization. It didn't need persuasion. It only needed daylight. And once it had that, HOA Karen's power stopped being threatening and started being fragile, because systems tolerate abuse quietly until they're forced to see it clearly. And once they do, they don't forget. By the time the file was complete, the question wasn't whether she'd crossed the line. It was how long she'd been doing it, and how many people she'd assumed would never compare notes. The discovery phase ended with certainty, not anger. And that certainty was more dangerous to her than any confrontation could ever be. The confrontation didn't begin with shouting. It began with certainty. Once the proof was complete, once every document aligned and every action traced back to HOA Karen's hand, the tension shifted. Power hates exposure, and she could feel it before a single word was spoken. The neighborhood felt different in the days leading up to the meeting. Quieter, heavier, like everyone knew something was about to break but didn't yet know where the fault line ran. The HOA meeting was her stage. It always had been. She treated those gatherings like performances, standing at the front with her clipboard and practiced authority, controlling the pace, the tone, the outcome. People attended out of obligation, not engagement. They sat quietly, nodded when expected, and left quickly. That night was different before it even started. Cars lined the street. People arrived early. Conversations didn't stop when Karen entered the room. They followed her with their eyes instead. She smiled anyway. She always smiled. It was part of the armor. She opened the meeting with the usual remarks about community standards and property values, her voice polished, rehearsed, confident. She talked about rules like they were natural laws, inevitable and unquestionable. She believed that if she spoke long enough, loud enough, the room would fall back into its old habits. Silence, compliance, deference. It didn't. When the floor opened for resident concerns, the air shifted. Chairs creaked. Someone coughed. Then someone stood. Not us. A neighbor. One who'd never spoken before. They asked about selective enforcement, about why fines seemed to target the same households. Karen deflected smoothly, citing policy, dismissing the question as misunderstanding. Another person stood. Then another. Different stories. Same pattern. Her answers grew shorter, sharper, less patient. Then Tina stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't posture. She didn't accuse. She asked permission to present information. Karen tried to interrupt, tried to reclaim control, but the room wasn't hers anymore. The projector came on. The first image filled the wall. Not commentary, evidence. The SUV, the trajectory. The moment our son was standing where no child should ever face a moving vehicle. The room inhaled as one. Karen tried to speak. Her words collided with the image behind her. Tina advanced the slide. Server logs, timestamps, deletion records. The proof that footage existed and was erased. Karen's name highlighted in the system actions. No speculation, no interpretation. Just facts displayed without apology. Someone shouted, not at us. At her. The next slide showed the tow order, the false citations, the unauthorized removal attempt. The signature authority traced back to Karen alone. Another neighbor recognized the company name. Someone else recognized the tactic. Voices overlapped now. The quiet compliance she relied on fractured into collective realization. The money came last. Ledger entries, reclassifications, administrative expenses mapped directly to services at her own address, landscaping, vehicle services, enforcement costs that only ever benefited one property, her property. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was betrayal settling in. Karen's composure cracked in stages. First irritation, then denial, then outrage. She accused us of manipulation, of vendetta, of destabilizing the community. Her voice rose as her authority fell. The louder she got, the smaller she sounded. Every attempt to regain control only highlighted how little of it remained. When law enforcement entered, it wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. They didn't rush. They didn't shout. They asked questions they already knew the answers to. The evidence had been reviewed. The CPS report, the deleted footage, the financial discrepancies, the attempted vehicle seizure. The assault investigation reopened with intent no longer in question. Handcuffs are quieter than people expect. The sound they made felt final, in a way no argument ever could. Karen didn't look at us as she was escorted out. She looked at the room she once controlled, at the neighbors who wouldn't meet her eyes anymore, at the authority that evaporated the moment it was examined. The collapse wasn't just hers. It rippled outward. The board froze. Vendors withdrew. The HOA's legal counsel resigned within days. What had been presented as order revealed itself as dependency on one person's unchecked power. Once removed, nothing held. The meeting ended without ceremony. People lingered, talked, compared stories they'd never shared. The confrontation didn't end in triumph or celebration. It ended in relief, in the quiet understanding that something dangerous had been stopped before it could escalate further. Karen's power had relied on isolation, on making each target believe they were alone. The public collapse shattered that illusion permanently. And once that illusion was gone, there was nothing left for her to stand on. The retaliation didn't come from shouting or vengeance. It came from precision. Once HOA Karen was removed from the equation, the question wasn't whether damage had been done, but how deeply it had spread, and who else had been affected. Abuse like hers never exists in isolation. It embeds itself into processes, habits, and quiet assumptions. Undoing it required more than removal. It required reconstruction. That's where expertise mattered. Not emotional outrage, not neighborhood gossip, but professionals who understood how systems fail and how they're rebuilt when trust has been compromised. The audit began within days. Financials first. Independent forensic accountants went through years of HOA records line by line, not looking for errors, but for intent. Patterns of selective enforcement, funds rerouted through ambiguous categories, expenses approved without quorum. Each discovery confirmed what we already knew. Karen hadn't bent the rules occasionally. She'd rewritten them through repetition. Legal experts followed, not to sensationalize, but to stabilize. Every improper fine was cataloged. Every lien threat evaluated. Every action taken without authority flagged for reversal. The goal wasn't punishment for its own sake. It was to unwind the harm cleanly so no one else carried consequences they never earned. Residents who had paid unjust fines were identified. Refunds were calculated. Apologies were drafted not as optics, but as record corrections. Child Services reviewed their own involvement as well. The false report wasn't just dismissed. It was documented as misuse. That designation matters. It protects future families from being targeted the same way. Karen's attempt to weaponize the state backfired permanently because systems don't forget abuse once it's proven. Her name would follow that report wherever authority checks occurred again. The neighborhood shifted as oversight returned. New board members were elected under supervision. Term limits imposed. Transparency requirements formalized. Camera access policies rewritten so no single individual controlled evidence again. Every safeguard Karen had bypassed was reinforced deliberately, not emotionally. The goal wasn't to prevent another Karen, it was to remove the possibility entirely. Experts explained something quietly profound during that process. Power structures fail when convenience replaces accountability. Karen's rise wasn't just about her personality. It was about systems left unchecked because people assumed they were safe. The retaliation against her wasn't revenge. It was correction, a recalibration of authority back to its intended purpose. For our family, retaliation took a different form. Counseling was offered, support documented, medical evaluations included in the record. The incident with the SUV wasn't minimized or reframed. It was treated as what it was. A violent act stopped by seconds and instinct. That mattered legally, but it mattered more emotionally. Validation isn't loud. It's steady, and it changes how people breathe again. Neighbors who'd been silent began participating. Not out of anger, but relief. Stories surfaced. Not dramatic ones. Small ones. A fine that made no sense. A threat that felt personal. A moment when someone decided it wasn't worth fighting. Those moments mattered because they showed how close the community had come to normalizing abuse. The retaliation phase ended without spectacle. No speeches, no declarations, just corrected records, rebuilt processes, and the quiet restoration of something that should never have been taken in the first place. Safety, trust, agency. Karen wasn't part of that future. Not because she was punished, but because the system no longer had room for someone like her to hide inside it. And that was the most effective retaliation of all. Victory didn't arrive with cheering neighbors or headlines or a sense of celebration. It came quietly, almost unnoticed, the way real endings usually do when there's nothing left to prove. The stand was rebuilt, stronger than before, but that wasn't the victory. The HOA board was replaced, policies rewritten, oversight installed, but that wasn't it either. The real victory settled in when fear stopped dictating our daily rhythm. Mornings returned to being ordinary. Kelvin went back to counting coins without glancing up every time a car slowed near the driveway. My wife stopped bracing herself whenever an unfamiliar number called. I stopped scanning the street out of habit, waiting for another manufactured emergency. Nothing dramatic announced the change. The absence of pressure did. Karen's name faded from conversation faster than expected. Not because people forgot, but because she no longer mattered. Authority stripped of its platform doesn't echo. It dissolves. Her tactics, once so effective, now sounded absurd when retold. The idea that a clipboard and a title could terrorize an entire street felt almost embarrassing in hindsight. That's what happens when power loses its witnesses. The neighborhood didn't transform overnight into something idyllic. It didn't need to. It simply became normal. That was enough. Kids rode bikes without being policed. Lawns grew uneven in places. People waved again without checking who was watching. Order returned without intimidation, which is how it should have been from the beginning. There were no apologies from Karen. None were expected. Silence replaced her presence completely. Court dates came and went without commentary. Paperwork closed, files archived. Her story ended not with a statement, but with irrelevance. No one defended her. No one missed her. Systems moved on without needing her input, which was the final proof that she had never been essential at all. Kelvin's stand opened again the following summer. Same spot, same sign, same refusal to be bullied. He didn't sell to everyone. He didn't have to. That mattered. Choice returned where it had been threatened. Watching him work that table without fear felt heavier than justice. It felt permanent. Nothing about the ending felt cinematic. There was no final confrontation worth replaying, just the slow realization that the threat was gone and wasn't coming back. That power, once exposed, doesn't regenerate in the dark. It stays buried. Karen went quiet. Nobody argued after that. That was the last time she tried it.